It would be easy for us to use this passage from Luke's Gospel as an excuse not to do the dishes or to take out the trash or not to clean the bathroom. Surely this is the better portion that Jesus is speaking of. But this passage looks slightly different in light of the circumstances of the world today. The mass killing in Nice, recent shootings in Orlando, Dallas, and New Orleans, and I just saw before I came over here in Baton Rouge, with protests erupting alongside funerals and tension building across the nation and the world. With all of that in mind, we might find ourselves taking the mentality of Martha, calling out, "Do something. Lord, do you not care that the world has turned against itself? Do you not care that your people are living in fear?" Burdened by our efforts to generate systems and procedures that prevent such violence, but weighed down with exhaustion at our inability to do so, we might find ourselves frustrated that God is not provoking His people to greater action, or that He Himself is not moved to put a stop to it all. And maybe we're tempted to think that prayer is not sufficient. It's not enough to simply dialogue with God. It's not enough to just sit next to Mary at the feet of Jesus and listen to what the Lord has to say. We can't hole up in churches and chapels and expect that our innermost thoughts will somehow create change in the minds of those who generate such hatred and violence. Which is true. And so, our inclination is to turn straight to action. Let's create more laws. Let's restrict this or loosen that. Let's ban this and build that. But in all of our activity, in all of our plans and strategies and attempts at solving the problem, we fail to stop and look in the face of those people who are crying, or the people who are filled with hate, or the people who are living in fear. We can't see Christ in the midst of all the violence because we're too busy trying to stop it. And it can make us dizzy. How are we supposed to respond? If prayer isn't enough, if action isn't enough, what's the balance between the two? How can we figure out how to respond properly to what surrounds us in our culture today? It makes me wonder what we see when we look at the faces of those who commit such terrible crimes against humanity. Their faces publicized for all the world to see. What do we see in their faces? Because somewhere, in the heart of that madman behind the wheel of a truck on the boardwalk of the French Riviera, there is the presence of God. Somewhere, in the hearts of those who turn to violent protest and fight violence with violence, there is imprinted the image of the God of compassion. And all that may be ignored and lost, the same Spirit that once hovered over the waters of creation and breathed life into the nostrils of the first man and woman, there is also, that Spirit is also present in those who now choose to take life away in acts of violence and hatred. Where has that image gone? Where has that Spirit gone? What has happened to us? What evil has crept into our hearts that creates such division and hatred? And friends, we have to be careful, because this is not a distant problem. It's not a problem of some far-off imaginary land. Because can seep into our hearts as well. It doesn't require brainwashing or coercion. It begins in simple ways, in ways sometimes that we don't even notice. We stop informing and listening to our consciences. We immerse ourselves in gossip and hurtful language, and we don't have to travel to a distant country to find this problem. It is present in our own community. It is a diabolic sin that tears us apart from the inside. This terrorism of the heart begins when we decide that we will take our lives into our own hands, that we will build for ourselves the happiness that we desire, leaving the less fortunate and the less creative to fend for themselves. The anger and hatred and violence of terrorism begins in our own hearts. When we decide that I no longer belong to you, and you no longer belong to me, it is the greatest sin against the body of Christ that we divide ourselves from this community that was given to us so that we might make our way together towards salvation. To divide that body, to allow things to creep into that body, to generate division in that body, goes against our very nature. It goes against the gift that God has given to us through His Son. The good news, and there is good news in the face of such division and such concern. The good news is that the remedy for this terrorism of the heart is not far off. It is to look after one another, to care for one another, to be responsible for one another. That means no more using people for your own ends. It means no more talking about people behind their backs. It means reaching out to people that we know who are in need of help. This isn't rocket science. It's not something that we have to sit around and really figure out. It is simple. Simple care for one another. To recognize that we have a responsibility to care for our brother or sister who is in need. This is the remedy for this division that can pull us apart and separate us from one another. But first, before we jump into action, it means sitting together as a community of faith at the feet of Jesus, listening to Him speak,